So I'm going to bring Mark and our other discussants into the panel, and we might have a chat in and around what Mark has discussed, but also some of the other aspects of the Leader programme and how we maybe can celebrate this programme as we see it reaching this 30-year milestone. So I'm going to bring in, as we maybe highlight some of our people, Dorian Green, I'm going to bring in, who's the CEO of Clare Local Development Company. I have Terry Keenan, I have Sonia Kavanagh, and I have Mary Clarke. And as I speak to each one of these, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, because I think it's important to maybe talk a little bit to these people, but also let you know where these people have come from, their expertise in the area of rural development, and their expertise and knowledge in the relation to the Leader programme. So maybe, Mark, before we go any further in relation to your conversation, I love this idea of the collective vision, Mark, this idea that really the Leader programme is something that has assisted and helped people for 30 years here in Ireland and right across Europe. But really, it is a collective vision. It's about much more than the governments who deliver out the money. It's much more than the LAGs who assist in that process. It's even much more than the participants on the ground. It's this collective vision that we all have. I'd love you to talk a little bit more on that.
Well, that's a really interesting aspect of it. And of course, all the things I mentioned so superficially, there's so much more to say. With the collective vision, I think one of the things to note is that having a collective vision is very motivating. It can be a real way of enthusing everybody in the community to work together for a common aim and with a common identity. But it is quite difficult often to generate, because there are different interests. There can be conflicting within a community. And this is one of the aspects of leadership which is often neglected. I mean, there's a lot of people think of leadership in terms of the sort of charismatic leadership that people will follow along with somebody who's got that presence and ideas. But the ability to actually carry with you different groups within the community, and when tensions arise, to resolve the conflicts and be able to move forward together, I think is a really important and neglected part of the skills. And this is where, community development skills and training come in, although some people have these skills without the training. But as we go forward, as we've learned from these 30 years, we've gained in the knowledge of how to actually try and build a collective vision. I'm sure some of your other panelists will have some experience to share on that.
Absolutely, Mark, thank you very much. And I'm going to go now to Dorian Green, and again, no more, I suppose, than Maura Walsh and Carmel Fox and all these other wonderful people we have around the country. Dorian is also one of those people really who has driven rural development over an absolute number of years. So Dorian is the CEO of Clare Local Development Company, again, one of these community-led local development organisations that we have around the country. And Dorian's organisation was set up in 2009, and I suppose it really was set up to deliver that range of rural development, social inclusion, enterprise supports, training communities right across the county of Clare. But before 2009, Dorian's career didn't just start in 2009, it started a long time before that. And really, Dorian was the CEO of the Rural Resource Development, that Leader lag for County Clare, having started out as a projects officer in Clare Leader in 1993. So Dorian, you really have followed the path of Leader right throughout all of that time. And I suppose what I've asked you, or what I think that it would be nice for you to do maybe, is reflect on your position as a CEO of Clare Local Development Company, and what you feel maybe the key lessons that we've learned during that time that we've engaged in Leader throughout the country.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Maura, and thanks, Mark, for that really inspirational presentation. I think you absolutely nailed so many things that I would like to say about Leader as well in Ireland. As Maura said, my experience with Leader goes back to 1993, early 93, when Clare Leader had just started, was just about a year old. And I came to the county for what I thought was a 2-year job, but it ended up on 28 years later, still here in Clare, still still involved, still managing Leader, and still believing in Leader and what it set out to achieve back in the early 90s. Over those 30 years, or the 30 years that Leader has existed, and my 28 years in Leader, I suppose if you were to present Leader on a graph, you would say that, from the earliest days, from when it started, right up until, I'd say, 2014, Leader was, the line on the graph was going up. Leader went from strength to strength in Ireland. It covered all of the country in those years. Our relationships with government and with the EU went from strength to strength. Our involvement and our impact in the rural areas, and the impact that we had, was very significant. So I would say Leader flourished, the rural communities flourished, and the relationships that the lags had at government and EU level flourished also. And I think it's fair to say that we were the envy of Europe for all of those years. And despite, fears that in the early days that things might go off the rails, which Tony Burke, some of you will remember, used to say to me, he said, we were terrified we were all going to go mad with the money and that it would all end in disaster. And that was the fears that I suppose government had in the early days, but it didn't happen, and it worked out very well. And I think, what the Northumberland study has shown is very similar story to our own in Ireland. I think things changed in 2014 in the last programme. And I suppose it's been a turning point in Leader, and I would say has been the start of a decline in Leader in Ireland. And sorry to have to say that, but I think what happened in 2014 was that the lags that had been there, that had all of the capacity, the expertise, and had that huge impact, they were split from the decision making. So the lags, most of the lags in Ireland, were divided into two entities, one which was delivering and one which was making the decisions. And I think that was had a huge impact on Leader. And I think what happened was that we moved from a very developmental focus, a strong social inclusion focus in Leader, to a grant-giving, bureaucratic programme, which has not delivered, which many areas around the country, and those areas who are under the local authority-led Leader groups, are struggling to maintain a development focus in Leader. I think it has become a grant stream which has become increasingly unattractive as a grant stream because of the bureaucracy, and the old lags that had all that expertise, that were community-led and that were volunteer-led, were stripped of their role in Leader. And the new lags became entities which were not a partnership of equals, but local authority-led lags. And that's not what Leader was about. And I think one of the things that I think I feel most strongly about over the 30 years is that in those last 7 years, the Leader approach has become devalued. The very things that you showed, Mark, in the slide, and you talked about, the things that mattered, that made Leader different, and the vision that was around all of those special things about Leader, the emphasis has gone off them. They have been forgotten about. They don't, not at local level, and not to the local development companies, the implementing partners, and the lags, those of us that are fortunate to still be what we call independent community-led lags. But I think we're at a stage now where I think we're probably at a crossroads in Leader now. The budget cuts have decimated the programme. We certainly, the programme has been scaled back in the last number of years, but now what we're facing into is an absolute decimation of Leader. The budget cut that's proposed of 40% on top of what's come before will leave Leader as a pale shadow of itself. I mean, we're all struggling in ILDN to see how we can deliver and maintain a leader program with the structures, delivery structures that have been there, unless they change back to genuine community-led structures, and also unless we have a budget that will actually sustain the development approach. Because what will happen is, as the budget gets smaller, leader will become only a grant-giving stream of funding, just like any other, but with a lot of bureaucracy attached to it. So I think we have achieved so much, and there isn't a Doirín in County Clare where there isn't a leader project over all these years, and so many wonderful, successful projects. And it's inspiring to see all that has been done and been achieved. So, you know, I don't take any pleasure in saying that I fear that we won't be inspiring anybody from 30 years onwards, unless there are some significant changes to the structures and to the budget of leader. But I think we can, it's not too late to do that. I think there's still time for that to happen.
Yes. Yeah, Dorian, thanks a million. Yes, without a doubt, it is only apt, I think, and right, you know, to highlight those kind of issues that we have. I think every program, everything has issues, and I think it's really important to air those issues, make sure that we try and evaluate them, and make sure we try and write them in some way. And I suppose not taking either, which was nice at the end there, not taking either from those inspirational projects that we have seen. And I think as we started the National Rural Network here in Ireland, with Irish Rural Link and the Wheel and Philip Farley's group, I think one of the first pieces of work I looked at was the 9,500 projects that were funded by Leader in the last round of funding. And absolutely, you couldn't but be inspired. But definitely, during those challenges are there. Terry, Keenan, I might move on to you as well, Terry, out in Forum Connemara. And again, Terry is the chairperson of the Forum Connemara partnership company that really, I suppose, again, no more than Dorian's group, promotes and assists that engagement in social and enterprise development. Really out in the Connemara area, we're often been told about the peripheries of our countries. And really Connemara is one of those peripheral areas that really never falls down when it comes to rural development and try to develop their area. And Terry is also the Irish Local Development Network's representative on the European Leader Association for Rural Development, ELARD, on their governing council. So really, again, Terry has a huge wide range from Connemara all the way right across Europe. So in saying that, Terry, and I know, Terry, you have a great affinity towards that volunteer person that really is at the centre of what Leader is all about. That ethos that we have in Leader in and around the bottom-up approach, in and around people from communities coming together. So I suppose in that vein of thinking, I'd like you maybe to reflect a little bit on the work, I suppose you as a volunteer community representative on the board of the local action group, but maybe even the wider thinking of volunteers who need to apply for the Leader funding.
Thank you, Maura, and good morning. And I suppose I found inspiration, actually, first of all, from what Professor Mark has said here and about the work he has done in how Leader has changed over the years. And first of all, Maura, can I congratulate you on your local football team winning the county championship. I think that shows, when you say about community, when the local team wins, it brings the community together in a very positive outlook, a very positive frame of mind, and everyone in that village is celebrating today of your win yesterday. And if you bring that back to the beliefs of the real locally led, community-led local development, we celebrate the small wins in Leader in our community. Because as a volunteer, I believe in trying to help my neighbour, my friend, my community, my neighbour in the next village. And that brings it in to the local area-based approach. That isn't an administrative area, that is an area where people identify themselves as being from. As we identify ourselves from being from Connemara, which is a distinct area of Galway. And I looked at Professor Mark's map of Ireland, and it showed the legs of Ireland, but it showed two legs that actually don't exist. It showed a leg called Galway East and a leg called Galway West. My leg is Forum Connemara. We operate in the Connemara area. Galway Rural Development operates in the other area of Galway. So we are the legs in those areas. There is no leg called Galway West or no leg called Galway East. Someone obviously decided to produce a map that writes me off as a volunteer chair and writes my organisation off a map. That I find is insulting to me as a volunteer that is committed to my community, committed to my neighbours, committed to helping my village, my next door neighbour's village. I have an interest in Roundstone, Clifton, Ballyconneely, or whatever. I don't have an interest in areas 100 miles away. They are alien to me because I know the people I live among, I know the people that are around me. And one of the things in leader that is lost and I feel is being lost is the whole area of capacity building and animation. It is very important when the people are the weaker the community, the more vulnerable your community, that capacity building is there, that animation is there to help the person get on the rung of that ladder, that you can put that person on the first rung. It may not be a big grant. It may be a very insignificant grant, but it gets the person off the ground and moving up and gives them, in often cases, it just means the encouragement to develop further up along the line. And I think that is what is very important in leader, that we have a real community-led local development, that it's area-based, and that the real principles of leader are to the fore in all decision-making. I think John F. Kennedy put it very well some years ago when he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. At times, I feel as a volunteer that my country doesn't want me volunteering, that my country doesn't want to hear my voice. Yes, I can answer a survey. Yes, I can go to a meeting and have someone tick a box that they consulted with me as a community rep, that they consulted with me as a volunteer. But the majority of the time, it's someone else's interpretation of what I believe and what my community believes is what is brought forward. And I object to that because I'm a human being living in a community. My views and the views of my neighbours and my communities are just as valid, in my opinion, as anyone else's. And I think that is where leader started. That's where leader principle. You can't take one principle of leader. You have to take the totality of the 7 principles of leader and operate them together and bring them forward, where you're bringing your community together, you're bringing your community forward, and you're raising all the boats at the one time.
Terry, some excellent, passionate words there. I definitely think you might have been at the senior county final as well yesterday with that kind of passion. But that is really, I suppose, what volunteerism, what community, what leadership, what leader is actually all about. It really does. And I think, you know, even the maps aside, I think really mapping us and bringing forward where we are, this place-based thinking that we have in Ireland is hugely part of what we are as people, what we are as communities. And that passion that you see from Terry really epitomizes that idea of community and community space. So Terry, thanks a lot for that. And I suppose thinking of volunteers again and volunteer people who are really the center of the leader program, and this idea of those also having their vision in and around what this cooperative vision that Mark spoke about. I'm going to maybe move over to Mary Clarke. And Mary, I suppose, was rocketed to fame last weekend when she was on the countrywide RT1 programme, where we spoke about the 30 years of leader and also about a recent book that we have launched in the National Rural Network, looking at a whole host of case studies in and around the Leader programme. And I suppose on that, I'd like to thank, you know, the minister who launched it for us last week, but also Galway Rural Development and Steve Dolan, and one of the projects, the Walled Garden in Montbellier, where we also launched the booklet. But Mary also spoke about her community on Countrywide last Saturday morning. And I think because of this, and again, like Terry, because of her passion for our community, we invited Mary maybe to talk a little bit this morning in relation to her as a promoter, somebody who has maybe looked for Leader funding. And Mary is the treasurer of the Caltra Community Centre Development Association in North East Galway. And she represents maybe, I suppose, the Leader promoters here this morning among us. And I'd like Mary, maybe first of all, maybe Mary, to tell us a little bit about your experience in applying for Leader funding via the Caltra Community Centre in East Galway.
First of all, Maura, congratulations on yesterday, our neighbouring parish. Very well done. And I can reiterate what Terry said there from experience of Caltra 18 years ago. And I'd say everybody in the parish still remembers how it affected the parish, how everybody came out, and it literally raised the spirits of everybody. And hopefully Montbellier will go on to do the same. Yeah, I suppose I came into the Caltra Community Centre Development Association 2.5 years ago. And I come from a local government background. So as you were talking there, I was thinking of what Dorian was saying about the bureaucracy involved. And yes, I found it a little bit bureaucratic applying for the grants, I have to say. Now, having said that, we have GRD, Galway Rural Development, and they have been very, very helpful in terms of advice and literally streamlining how to go about the application, what was needed, and they dot the I's, cross the T's for us. So that has been extremely helpful. Having said that, we have done a number of projects. I suppose the first one I have been involved in has been an extension to the centre. And that came about because we didn't have a stage fit for purpose, but we have a very, very good drama group that goes back all the way to the days of Macra na Firma. And they wanted a proper stage. All we had was a makeshift one, and the same thing for bingo. So this came about 2 years after the centre had been built. So there wasn't much funding available, but the drama group, they put 25,000 into it. And we did get a grant for 96,000, almost 97,000. So that meant our group had to produce about 16,000, which wasn't too bad. Now, what's the effect, the long-term effect of all of that? It has been extremely positive, needless to say. It has, first of all, it has increased the capacity of the centre. Because of the design, it has increased our capacity from something like 250 up to over 700. So we can now, you know, hold much more bigger events and a greater diversity of events. So we have things like, we ran things like the Cube and the local Oscars. And the reason I mention those is because in themselves, they're fun. But the people who partake in those are people who probably have never stood on a stage before. So it takes people out of their comfort zone, broadens their horizons, gives them more experience and gives them confidence. And I think that's part of the whole Leader ethos of social inclusion. It has increased, as I said, the number of activities we can have. We have a very active and very good bingo session every month, which is great. That's the bread and butter, and they keep the lights on money, really. But we also have an awful lot of sporting activities, and we have other things that could come under health, like Pilates, mindfulness, generally well-being. And again, that is important in a community. I suppose looking forward now, unfortunately, due to COVID, the centre was only open the extension was only open a few months when COVID came and lockdown came. So very little has happened since. But one of the things we need, and I will be applying for it at the first opportunity, is broadband. And I think that will expand us out. I know we mentioned earlier about agriculture. I come from an agriculture background. Most of the people in this area, they're either farmers or part-time farmers. And one of the things I have noticed for a long time is that a lot of the older generation farmers, they really do struggle with the whole administration and all the form filling and all the rest of it for the Department of Agriculture and so on. The younger farmers, they will go to information sessions run by various government agencies and ask the questions. The older people will not. They are afraid. There is this fear. And I would be hoping that one of the things we could do would be bring the information to them if we had the broadband, that we could get a session run from one of those agencies and to get all the local people together in the room. And I know that sounds very rural and very, you know, the bottom of what it is, but that is what Leader is about. It's about helping the local community. And I would be hoping that then once when you get in a room in that kind of environment, once one person asks a question, more and more join in and the confidence grows. And information is, you know, knowledge and information really is what you need. It gives the confidence, it builds the people, and it builds the community. I suppose we have been very lucky. We have got a sustainability grant from Heather Humphreys, which has been brilliant. It means that we can now do a little bit of renovating on the centre, the inside of it from all the sports. It needs painting, and all of this is very basic, but it's important to a small community. And we were hoping that when we get it open again, all the dance classes will come back, all the music sessions will come back, all the children will come back. The schools use the centre for gymnastics and other types of exercise, really. But one of the things that appears to be happening is teacher sharing between schools. Now, if that comes into being, we would be hoping that perhaps we could use the broadband, bring the number of schools together in the hall and use our broadband for the teacher sharing. And that way you integrate schools and you broaden their horizons basically at a very young age. And that really is where I would be hoping we would be going. So it's sharing of knowledge, it's building what we can offer in the community centre, while at the same time keeping the things like bingo and all the other, the drama group, all of that going to keep the community alive and together.
Yes, absolutely, Mary. And I think you paint a picture of so many communities around this country. The communities who really, those community centres who are often at the centre of the heartland of each community. And I think without those, I suppose, without that funding really that can renovate those community centres or rebuild them from the bottom up like that you did in your community, I think we lose the heart of a community. We often talk about the post office and losing the bank and losing these kind of things. But I think the community centre is also the heart of a community. And I think you've really proven that in Caltra, where you have brought so many people together, old, young people, the children from the playground, the GA pitch at the side, everybody is brought together into this community centre. And community centre is not just a building, that's exactly what it is. That's what the wording actually means. It's a centre for community. So Mary, that painted a really lovely picture. I'm going to go on to maybe our last person on our discussion panel. And Sonia Kavanagh is, I suppose, a Kildare native who is joining us today. And she spent the last 27 years working again in the local government. And she was appointed as interim chief executive of Kildare County Council. And Sonia has worked, I suppose, in a range of delivery services via the County Council, via the economic, community and cultural development, roads, transportation, public safety, housing, cooperation. And she's also acted as a chief officer of Kildare LCDC. And she has been appointed as the Community and City Manager Association on working with groups and forums with the focus on the LEADER programme. So again, I suppose somebody who is now working, Sonia, within this LEADER forum. I suppose I'd love you to maybe reflect from your point of view in relation to what you feel the communities, or how you feel local communities have been impacted by the Leader programme.
Thanks, Maura, and thanks to the previous speakers. I have to say I'm probably coming at it from a different perspective, but I think I would pick up on a lot of the points that have been made in terms of that shared vision, and also the importance of capacity building and animation. I would totally agree with those points of view, and what Mark referred to earlier on about creating spaces of engagement. In terms of, I suppose, my own experience in Kildare, and I know my colleagues from County Kildare Leader Partnership, Carol Duffy and maybe Pat Leoger also at the conference here today. I might just pick a couple of the examples that they have given us in terms of the projects that I think have focused on some of those themes that the Minister was referring to earlier on. One of them was a community-led climate action programme, and I know it was using the community-led local development ethos to advance climate action. And I think in cases like this, when you're talking about a training programme for communities, it is that capacity building, it's that animation, it's what Mary spoke about, it's helping groups to actually access funding so that they can go on and make really positive change in their areas. And I know in that case, that programme of training has been taken elsewhere and replicated in other counties as well. And I'd also just reference, we have a fantastic amenity here with the Barrow Blueway project, which has which work is ongoing on, and I know it goes right past my own house, so it's been a fantastic amenity during COVID. But through the Leader programme, funding was secured for an economic plan for the Barrow Blueway, and I think it was a fantastic example of that local focus and that seeing opportunities for businesses along the Barrow Blueway. And it was also an example of agencies networking and sharing and communities and individuals coming together. So I think there's been quite a few of those programs, and also the grants for really important community centres, as Mary referenced earlier on, and other community facilities coming through there. So they're just a few examples, Maura.
Absolutely, Sonia, yeah. And again, those are the examples that are really, I suppose, replicated right throughout the country. And it's only when we look at the facts and the figures and the numbers and the amount of community groups that have access to the funding. And Mary alluded to the difficulty sometimes in gaining funding, as Doirín did as well. And it can be very difficult. It can be, you know, that kind of red tape attached to gaining funding can be very, very difficult for community groups to actually access funding. And I think Mark's research and other research that has been looked at in relation to Leader, I suppose, would have highlighted this point and has highlighted those communities that are already, I suppose, that really replicate this idea of social capital, that are networked, that are strong, maybe well-educated groups that are forming communities, can often overcome the difficulties in applying for Leader funding. But that again raises a question that Mark raised earlier on in relation to the inequalities of some communities not being able to apply for Leader. So that's an issue as well that we have to be really cognizant of. For a moment, I'm going to bring in a colleague of mine from Inuit Galway and the National Rural Network, Shane Conway. And Shane is has been looking at the chat. So just to make sure that we've included people as well, and maybe there are people who might like to ask a couple of questions as well via the chat. So I'm going to get Shane in for a second before we carry on.
Yeah, no, thanks a million. It's very active chat, and there seems to be a lot of common consensus about what a lot was being spoken about. Obviously, there's challenges involved, but also the positivity moving forward. I suppose Barry Sims, if you wouldn't mind maybe posing the question. I'm not sure, can you ask directly or do I have to read it out?
I think you just read it, Shane, if that's okay.
It's just referred to in Doiríns, you know, in every boring, but the challenge we ask is the volunteers to navigate the process is considerable. So I suppose just to kind of synopsize it, the value of the volunteers in the process at community level, if you wouldn't mind just highlighting that, because we all know, as Mary also alluded to, that, you know, it really is a community effort, and it does take quite a process. There is, you know, certain hurdles you have to cross. So just the value of that at community level, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, we'll bring Doirín in on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, the value of I suppose one of the things we would say is the value of the communities-led boards and the community-led lags is that they have an ethos and an influence over that lag, which pushes it very strongly towards being a developmental program that offers support, animation, capacity building, and innovation towards the community. So I think the value of the community involvement, and Terry, you're probably more qualified to speak about this because he is a volunteer and a community person in his lag, is that I think strong community-led lags push out the boundaries of innovation and developmental nature of the leader program, and they can connect more with the communities on the ground, and they understand what those communities need. So the things that Mark highlighted about the potential for inequality and the things Mary mentioned, those sort of supports, that understanding is there. It's not about a bureaucratic process of applying for a grant. It doesn't come from there at all, where the community is the focus, it's the priority. And I think that sort of capacity building, that engagement, that understanding, and the relationships that are built between lags and communities over time, it does allow people to develop one project, start with the simpler projects, as Mary said, and then build up, you know, and add to that. And the confidence that comes from that is the key to sustaining that change.
Okay.
So, and I think it also takes the emphasis off just the capital nature of leader, and which is a really important thing to understand. Leader, and we always say that leader isn't just about the capital grants. So I think that balance is hugely important, and that's where the community focus shifts the program to.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Just to follow on from that, I suppose Gabriel O'Connell from Monaghan has made a great point about the 7 key principles of leader, and I suppose the durability of them. Mark, if you wouldn't mind just commenting, I know in your presentation you mentioned that, but I suppose just how those principles can be, I suppose, adapted and even kind of modernized moving forward. I know that they're the core principles, but how do you think they can develop moving forward?
Thanks, Shane. Well, I think it's absolutely vitally important. The leader principles are something which are really held as in great value by people working in leader, people who've studied leader all over the continent. And yet we do seem to be slipping away from them in many countries. So I think the things that are important are things that people have spoken about here, going back to actually capacity building and animation, ensuring that the lag is, first of all, has a composition which reflects the communities involved. So the composition of who are the volunteers and the other members of the lag board are important. And having the power to actually pursue the priorities identified in the local development strategy through an active participation process. I do think another one of the leader principles, which has perhaps fallen out of favor a bit in the funding, is the transnational learning. I think, you know, there was so much of value from, not so much necessarily from the travel, you know, now we've got the possibilities to learn from each other in all sorts of other ways. But, you know, to meet the leader groups, I remember going to meetings where, you know, all the leader groups in Europe met in Brussels for celebration of leader and for learning from one another, and took tremendous learning back to their own communities as well. So, you know, there are some important elements in those leader principles which are which could quite easily be revived. I think some countries are still doing these, and we can learn from how they're doing them. But of course, each country, there's a different institutional landscape, different context, and we have to have it in the ways which are appropriate in each country.
Mark, thanks a lot for that, and Shane for coming in with those some of those questions, and Doirín and Terry, I suppose concentrating a little bit more on that volunteer that Doirín has spoken about, that Shane has asked the questions on. But I suppose what I would like to know is, I suppose, because the volunteerism is such an important part of Leader, do you think that we value volunteerism enough? Do you think that we value the volunteer enough, and how could we improve on that?
I suppose to a degree, no, because I would say in a lot of situations, you're consulted in a very, structured way. And it's a lot about box ticking, in my opinion, that you're there, you're told you're valued, you're told you're this, but it's if you engage with someone, there's feedback, there's two ways of feedback. There's feedback, interactive feedback, and there's also feedback afterwards on the points raised. In a lot of occasions, you'll go to meetings and there is consultation, but that's the end of the consultation. You don't hear anything afterwards. I say go back to the boards and the beliefs or the emphasis of community representatives on a board. Where we look at a problem, we're looking at finding the solution to help, rather than worried too much about the actual narrowed structures of how the system should work. We're interested about how you get a solution to the problem. I suppose, as one person described it to me one time, we have a unique, non-institutionalized view of issues rather than the structured groupthink of officialdom, if I can put it that way. That's a long-winded way of putting it. But I think if you look at it in a community and all the people around that board of community, we're looking at trying to solve it and help. And that's where we're starting. And the rest we try to suit to come into it. And that's what community-led local development, in my belief, is about.
Yes, Terry, a good point there. Some very, very good points. I think maybe, Sonia, if I might come back to you for a moment, I think maybe in lots of ways, and Mark again mentioned this in his presentation, this idea of moving forward Leader with all of these challenges that we have, not just, I suppose, within the model of Leader, but also challenges that we have, that we see all around us today, from climate change to COVID. And I suppose maybe concentrating on that, where do you see innovation in relation to Leader? This central idea of innovation, these entrepreneurs that we can fund via the Leader program, these community development kind of thinkings that are within all of the small communities all around this country that we have. Innovation really can be at the center of this. Where do you think we're at, I suppose, Sonia, in relation to innovation and the Leader program?
I think innovation has always been key to the Leader programme and will continue to be, and we see it through our local enterprise offices as well. Even during the really difficult time that has been COVID, there has been more and more people coming forward to do start your own business courses and coming forward with ideas. They want to try something different. They have innovative ideas and they need some advice and support. And Mary spoke about advice and support for filling out forms and for people maybe to ease them through the administrative process. I don't think there's ever been a shortage of ideas. I think it's Terry spoke about coming up with solutions, and I would totally agree. It should be a solution-focused attitude that we have to all of these things, because there are always good ideas coming through. And whether it's about capacity building, some additional animation, or some support that can be given, sometimes it's just to put a bit of shape on that innovation and idea. And I'll just refer back to the community-led climate action programme that we had here. absolutely no shortage of ideas, innovation, people willing to change and put forward great ideas that others can come behind and support as well. So I don't see that as an issue. And I think it's very much, I think everybody agree, it is part of the shared vision. And it's to then facilitate and support that innovation and innovative ideas that come through and those communities. But also you touched on it, and I think the Minister touched on it as well, where there are communities who maybe don't have that capacity as it stands at the moment, having the space in the programme to actually facilitate and support those is absolutely key. We want to see new communities coming through that haven't availed of grants before, and we want to be able to help those people. And part of that is a focus in Leader and funding within Leader for animation and for helping and supporting those communities, so that we can actually give them the time to bring them through the whole process.
Absolutely, Sonia. Yeah, and I think, I'm not sure who was it at one stage that said rising tides lift all boats, and I think that's really important as well. We need to make sure that those communities who maybe do not have that social capital built up, that they have the opportunity of maybe coming forward in relation to Leader funding as well. Mary, if I go back to you for a moment, I just wanted to know, I suppose, and it was raised again in relation to the chat here as well, but I suppose we are all living with this terrible, I don't want to say nuisance, but this terribleness of COVID for nearly 2 years now. And I suppose looking into the future, looking the way our numbers have gone, looking, I suppose, the way in which we are facing each other today. And we had a great vision in the beginning of the National Rural Network that at the end of the network's lifetime, that we were going to go to Croke Park, which is our national stadium here in Ireland for the Gaelic Athletic Association. And we were going to bring this conference to Croke Park. And I suppose it was my vision as a great GAA follower, as well as some of the other people around the table. And I suppose COVID maybe has done that to us. It has disallowed us to connect directly with all of the people that we really want to have those chats with around the coffee, as well as listening to them. So Mary, where do you think, I suppose, community, where do you think Leader funding, where do you think maybe, even you spoke earlier on about your community centre in Caltra that maybe has closed at intervals because of COVID. What do you think the impact is of COVID in relation to community development, the Leader funding, all of this?
I think definitely it has increased isolation for many of our groups. And I go back to our bingo group, for example, and this is very much one case in point, but I'm sure there are many that we don't know about. We have people coming to our bingo who are carers. Not alone do they come themselves, but they bring the person that they're caring for. Now, the person may not be able to actively participate, but at the same time, there is a level of engagement there for that person and the carer. It's an outlet for them. That's gone. So in that sense, social isolation is back. Where do we see it going? Hopefully, and we have putting plans in place to try to open safely. We were hoping we would do so in September, hasn't happened. But I think when we do, you know, people say, well, will people come? I think they will. People need to get out. They need other people. And until we can do that, one of the things we do is we send out messages every now and again to our clients, to people who come for various things to us. The GAA have cancelled their sporting until January, which is a big thing. It's unusual for that to happen, all that training. I'm sure the children miss it. I'm sure that impacts on the parents. That is a, you know, the children, where do they get their exercise? They get it in school, and then they come home to the long, dark winter evenings. So there is an impact on the community.
Yes. And
until we can lift some of the restrictions, now this is very basic level at a very local level, I know, but it is important because we have referred there several times to what Leader does, and what it does, it starts on the ground. So until we can get back, there is an impact for virtually everybody who uses the centre.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's quite similar, I think, Mary, right across the country. So it has
I think it
impacted
is, yeah, it
hugely.
is replicated everywhere in
Yes.
various degrees and in various ways, but it is.
Yes. And I just want to remind people maybe to type into the chat, because we've got so many numbers on the actual conference, the numbers are so high, it's very difficult to call on people from the ground. So if you can pop it into the chat, I have Shane there waiting on the ready to put in any more questions that we want to fill in. But I suppose maybe before we draw a conclusion in and around our discussion here this morning, and maybe we might go back to each one of the discussants and maybe ask you, I suppose, maybe Mark, with you first, what do you feel, I suppose, was the most successful element of the leader program? Or maybe where do you feel that we really need to concentrate over the coming years to make sure, and particularly into the next program, to make sure that we have this a successful program and advance it the way in which Dorian was talking about earlier on?
Thank you, Maura. It's been really interesting to hear about how Leader is going in Ireland at the moment, and the great things and the challenges as well. It seems to me that having the right structure is very important, because volunteers are at the heart of this. And I know in the Northumberland case that I spoke about, the volunteers got very disillusioned. Many of them resigned from the committee, and although other people came forward, that really strikes at the heart of Leader. It's the people who are there making the connections, bringing their knowledge, bringing their networks, bringing their skills, are disillusioned, then that isn't working. So I do think the structures are very important, but I also think having more funding for staff and capacity building and animation is really key, because that way you can reach far beyond the people who are already capable. You can reach people who have difficulty filling in forms, and you can be more proactive, if you like, in getting people together. I was reflecting while the discussion was going on. I looked at the procedure for applying for Leader in England in this last phase, and there was something like a 30-page or 40-page form just for the expression of interest, and then another 30 or 40-page form for actual application, and all the information you had to provide and the accounts and all these sorts of things. Most people would look at that and think, it's just this isn't worth bothering with. And I was remembering back in Leader 1, when I was evaluating the Leader 1 in the Western Isles and Skye and Lochalsh. And it was very novel at that time. People were used to there being grant regimes under Objective 5B or under the Integrated Development Programme or the ADP or whatever it was. What are these new grants for? Are they for fences? Are they for sheds? What is it that you want me to apply for? Where's the money? And they were being told, the grants are for whatever you think will make a difference. People found that really difficult, but that's so empowering and so wonderful when you think about it. And I remember there was a fisherman in Stornoway Harbour who wanted, £600 to put a glass panel in the bottom of his boat so that he could take tourists out to see underwater. And, he hardly had to go through any forms. And that's a wonderful thing, an easy thing. And made a big difference, So we've come a long way to 30 or 40-page forms, and I understand why that's happened, because of many of the issues around accountability and funding in the EU. But we need to get back to that simpler model. We need to get back to being able to help people who need to have their power built, and we need to have greater ability of volunteers to actually get those things done.
Absolutely, Mark. Some very, very good ideas, very good thinking. I really like that idea of, whatever you think might make a difference. It's a very simple way of applying for Leader. Whatever you think might make a difference to your community is what you can apply for. And I suppose, Doirín, moving on to you again, like looking at what feature you feel, first of all, has been most successful, and then maybe that challenging feature that we really need to kind of take on board?
It's hard to pick one, Maura, but
Absolutely.
I think you know, the innovation in leader has been remarkable, and as Mark said, it's not a, you know, technology based. It comes from a culture within the LAG, and it's a very broad based social and cultural innovation. So I think that feature has driven an awful lot of the success of leader, but it has been enabled by strong animation and capacity building resource and ethos in the program, which has been diminished since 2014, and with the budget cuts that we're facing into, will probably almost disappear from leader if something doesn't change. So innovation on its own, it's not a box to be ticked. It requires a whole culture. It requires you not to be risk averse. You know, you can't be afraid of risk if you want to be innovative. You know, you have to be willing to take some chances, and even if something sounds a little different or new or outrageous, and you have to put the resources behind that. But most of all, you have to have a LAG board that's community led, that is willing and driven to take those that approach, and that is centered and focused on the community around them. And that is the features of leader. And that's the great thing about the 7 features of leader. You can't separate them. And the problem that we've had in the last few years is that they have been separated. And what we're doing in leader is becoming more controlled from central government and from local government. And that is diminished all of the features of leader, and in particular the innovation.
Dorian, thanks a million. So again, some very good, insightful thinking and ideas in relation to the leader program, but also the LAGs as well. Terry, if I could finally ask you in and around, I suppose, the boards of LAG and where you sit in relation to the leader program, not just in Ireland, but in Europe. What would you feel is that key feature that has been the most successful, or that key feature that we may need to look at to improve into the future? So it's just your mic there, Terry. Okay, I seem to have lost Terry off my screen for a minute.
Yeah, more, I think.
Yeah, I've lost Terry off my screen for a minute.
Sorry, something happened.
Oh, Terry, yes, you're back to us again.
Sorry, the joys of the internet out here, I suppose.
I know all about it. It's quite okay.
It went on me there for a minute. Sorry, Maura, I didn't get you there. It just went as you started talking.
That's okay, Terry. No, I was just saying, Terry, I suppose, as a member, a chairperson of the board of the LAG, and just looking maybe at what you see has been that most successful feature of the leader program, particularly over the number of years that you've been involved in it.
I would say, obviously, the original programs going back some time, the best thing I feel on the whole area was about the capacity and the assistance to the community, that you didn't just apply for a grant, that you had someone to hold your hand, I suppose, to build your capacity to get moving. And I think, like, whether it is as an individual with some entrepreneurial idea, or whether it's a community that wanted assistance. Like, I mean, I'm involved in community activities for over 30 years. And I know when I started out years ago filling an application form, it could be a simple grant application form. I just fill it and say what I wanted. And I didn't get anything because I didn't have the jargon needed to fill in about all this, about it was going to enhance this, it was going to add to this, it was going to do this, and that, and other. And if I didn't have all that jargon, I got nothing because I didn't fill out the necessary application. I just wanted whatever I wanted, and I thought that's the way you did it. But by getting assistance from leader people that were working in the company, then we got the capacity, we got to know how to make these applications over the years. And I think one of the things that as we see from the COP conference on the environment. To move on all these environmental issues, I believe you have to do it with the people themselves being helped to make changes. You cannot do that from the top down. If you start dictating to people from the top down, it ain't going to work. You've got to show it. We've shown it to some degree with the Forum Farming, where we brought 95 farmers together and we have them making changes and doing work on the Manpark Mountains and the 12 Pins in Connemara. And that is involving people that feel they have a buy-in to it because they're local people and they're being advised by a local lad who has qualifications in that area, and they know him, they know his family, and they trust him. And if you have the trust at local level and the trust of the organization that is advising you, that means a lot going forward. You aren't talking to the strong chair, as we'd say, that comes in and that tells you what you need, what you want, and what you should do. There is a resistance to that. Whereas if it's coming from the bottom and it's coming from your neighbour, and this is what community-led local development is about. And this, I believe, is what Leader is bringing us forward into. And I think we did it very well at the beginning. I'd love, as a community representative, to see us getting back to that level and that engagement, and that communities can grow from the bottom up.
Okay, great, Terry. Again, those key points, that centrality of the LAG, that idea that the LAG is so important, I suppose, in assisting and helping those communities, but also those volunteers that are needed to move forward into that space to apply for the funding, difficulties and all as there is in and around applications. Sonia, I suppose finally to go to you before I go to Mary. Again, I suppose, Sonia, what would you see as those key features of Leader that have been successful? And I think maybe reflecting on the successful elements of Leader, it's that area in which we may need to kind of really focus on them and make sure that we're bringing them forward, make sure that we're not losing the successful elements in and around some of the difficulties we have as well. So I suppose, Sonia, those kind of successful features that you've seen of Leader that we must make sure we hold on to and bring forward.
Yeah, thanks, Maura. And I suppose not to labour a point, but definitely animation and support is key to anybody bringing forward ideas. But there's been a lot of discussion around bureaucracy and administration and so on. I would say with any EU funded scheme, there's a very significant level of oversight and needs to be in terms of governance. So I suppose it's a balance between getting that governance right in terms of the spending of public money, but also helping individuals and groups and communities to get through that process in as easy a way as possible. And we see it with the protocol that has been developed between local enterprise offices and the Leader programme, where people are choosing between different funding streams based on how easy or difficult it is to go through that process. So I agree with the points that have been made. If there's a way to ease the administration or to help individuals, groups and communities to get through that administration. But I think that is really dependent on the level of funding that's available for animation and for the staff in the Leader companies to be there to actually bring people through that process step by step. So I think that is really key to this. I would disagree with some points that were made around the LAG structure. I would say that the LAGs that we have are absolutely community focused and are representative of communities as well. So I just wanted to make that point. But definitely for future programs, I think the key is the animation aspect of it, and helping those who apply to get through the process successfully.
Excellent, Sonia, absolutely. And I think I do know during our term in the National Rural Network, this idea of simplification of Leader was part of a workshop via the Commission, the European Commission as well. So I think it is something that they're cognizant of. Have they nailed it? We won't really, I suppose, know that fully, but it is something that they appear to be cognizant of. I know our own Department of Rural and Community Development were part of that as well. So I suppose simplifying this leader process really is something that we all need to reflect on, and that we all need to, I suppose, drive forward as well. Mary, maybe just to maybe give you, I suppose, as a promoter, as that person who is there in the community, who's trying to get leader funding, who's trying to drive their community, maybe to let us finish in relation to you. What do you feel that leader funding has brought to your community in Caltra? How do you feel that leader has enriched your community, has built maybe that social capital that we often talk about in academia and everywhere else, that networking, that bringing people together? How do you think leader has done that?
I suppose it has brought people out from their comfort zone in many respects. Social inclusion is a lovely term, but basically people have got involved in new pastimes, broadened their horizons. And it's a community growing, if you will, growing in confidence, growing in involvement. And to go back, I saw a comment there about fear, if I may address it in the same context. I think fear is generated not by a lack of ability, but a lack of a perception that maybe you're going to be caught out, maybe you're going to get something wrong. And it's that lack of confidence that holds people back. The facilities, the basic facilities and the different activities we run, when you look at what people do in them and how they integrate, you can see them growing. You can see them growing in their confidence. You can see them getting involved in other things. And if you can start that at the level of children, and we have a lot of different activities where children are involved in the centre, that is a very good place to start.
Excellent. Mary, thank you very, very much. And I think on this, we're going to move to a break. But before I go to a break, I just want to really, I think the voices of everybody. Nobody can agree with everything in the way in which leader has been run. There are issues, there are complications, and I think there'll always be issues. And I think if we look back 30 years ago, we probably had some issues as well. But we have issues now. But there will never be answers to those issues unless we bring forums together like we are doing now. We need to be able to talk about that. As Terry said, we need to be able to air those, and we need to feel that we're being heard. But we also need the backing and the support of the government, the backing and the support of the EU Commission in relation to the funding. We also need volunteers like Mary, we need CEOs like Doirín, we need chairpersons like Terry, we definitely need researchers like Mark Shucksmith, and we need people in the county council area like Sonya as well. We need that collective, that cooperative vision that Mark spoke about earlier on this morning. If we are going to really enhance communities, make sure that they are able to face the challenges that Mark spoke this morning, but to enrich them, to make sure that they are coming together, make sure that we are building that social capital that is needed in every community. So with that, I want to thank very, very much Mark for his wonderful presentation, his enlightening words and his reflection on leader over the last 30 years. I want to thank Doirín as well, Sonya, Mary and Terry, again for, I suppose, their reflections, for their enlightenment of where their careers, I suppose, have brought them in relation to the leader programme.